Hey guys, today I want to talk about why it's important if you want to drive towards more mature elements of process maturity, like automation. You really need to get these lower tier levels right. Now, if you haven't seen this before, this is our process maturity scale that we use with organizations to help them evolve the maturity level of their critical organizational processes. We have a lot of videos on this topic on our channel, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through all of this. But what I do want to focus on today is some of these lower levels. And I'm going to walk through why it's important, right? So let's use a fictional setting of a company that produces widgets. So when you're trying to build a foundation, let's say that you have a relatively manual process, there's a lot of enterprise kind of institutional knowledge driving it, right? There's a lot of people that you're very dependent on inside of that. Maybe the ownership level is a little bit ambiguous, right? Like there's all these kind of pain points that exist around it. So the first steps that you want to take is to clearly identify and define who the subject matter experts are. So who does the process every day, who knows how it works, and then who are the owners, who's accountable and responsible for it. You have to have clear ownership and accountability for the outcomes of a process if you ever want to move it forward. There has to be somebody that can be empowered to try to drive that improvement and then be held accountable if it's not like performing the way that it should, right? Then you want to process map your key processes. Then you want to define KPIs. How do we measure success? What does success look like? What does winning look like on this process? And build a data dictionary around those KPIs. If you take these steps, you're going to go a long way towards building a really strong foundation through which you can jump off into things like automation, etc. Right? So, what that looks like in actual practice in our fictional widget production process is first, after you've worked through who the subject matter experts are and who the ownership is, that's the first part. And that's more of kind of a conversation that you have to navigate depending on organizational culture. But once you get to that and you're ready to produce like an actual artifact, the first step is going to be process mapping. So this is just an example of a process map, fictional, for a company called Widget Co. that makes widgets. They got a material specialist, an assembly technician, a quality inspector. The material specialist is taking them through raw material acquisition, material prep, component manufacturing, right? Then it comes down here to the assembly technician who's going to have a control point for component inspection. If defects are detected, it's going to go back up to the material specialist to salvage raw materials. If no defects are detected, it's going to go to widget assembly. Then it's going to go to functional testing, which is another control point. Again, it could be discarded to waste if there are defects. Otherwise, it's going to go down to the quality inspector, who's going to do a final stress test on the quality for the audit, and then you're going to package them and ship them, right? So if this is the widget production process, you if you document, you can start to understand who does what, what's the flow, where are our checks and balances, where's our control points, right? By the way, you'll see the little Visio icon right here. We do have the process map template from Microsoft Visio that we use to create process maps available for free in a link in the description. So if you want to download that and start using our process map template, you're welcome to. You may have your own, that's perfectly fine. But if you want to use ours, you can download it in the link in the description. Now, um, once you have that, right? Once you've identified ownership, you know who the SMEs are, you've process mapped, you've now moved from kind of in between this level one, level two level, all the way up to level three here. And now you're ready to define your KPIs to continue advancing a little bit more, right? So KPIs on the widget production process. Basically, the easiest way to conceptualize how you go about defining KPIs is you need to talk to primarily leaders and the people who are accountable for the process because they know the type of outcomes that you're looking for. But you essentially have to ask the question, what does winning look like with this process? What outcomes do we want from this process? So in a production process like producing widgets, you might want good production cycle time. You might want high throughput rates. You might want good first pass yield, low rework rates, right? OEE statistics, good, right? There's a lot of things that you might use to measure different elements or lenses that you might take to look at success a little bit differently. But as you define those, like production cycle time, you need to define exactly what that means. And that comes from building a data dictionary. So we have an example of a data dictionary right here, right? And so you can add some other stuff into a data dictionary, but there are three critical elements that you have to have inside of a data dictionary. One is the term itself. So the metric, production cycle time in this case. Language is important. One of the biggest reasons for a data dictionary is to get everyone on the same page that when you say something, you mean the same thing. Because one of the biggest data quality issues inside of organizations is not that there's actually a problem with the data or that it's bad quality. It's that people say the same words, but they mean something slightly different with how they define it in their head. And that leads them to thinking that there is a data quality issue when people are just calculating what should be the same metric because the same word, but they're actually calculating it a little bit differently because in their head they define it differently, right? So with a data dictionary, you want what is the metric? What does this mean in layman's terms, like the description and definition to the business? So in this case, the time it takes to complete a single unit of a widget from the beginning of the production process to the end, right? So that's the business definition. And then you need the technical definition, which is we calculate it by, in this example, taking this time and date stamp in this table in the ERP and then subtracting this time and date stamp from this table in the ERP, right? How do we technically calculate this field? That's the third critical element of a data dictionary. You can add other things like additional notes, measurement unit just to describe how it's going to be stored, et cetera, et cetera. But the business definition, the business, the term itself, and then the technical definition, like we calculate it using these data fields, those are critical elements in building a data dictionary. Then once you have KPIs, now you can start to understand how you want to optimize the process, how you want to eliminate variation in the process, right? Because when you talk about like a SOP, for example, which is what we're showing on the screen, standard operating procedure, you want to optimize for performance in alignment with best practices, and best practices are defined by how, like, what helps you perform better on the KPIs that matter to you, right? So once you have that, now you can start to eliminate variation, right? Like if you've got 5, 6 guys doing the same job, you can start to measure them and see like, oh, Jimmy performs better than Alan. And so we're going to take the way that Jimmy does this and we're going to make that the standardized way of doing it. That's a very simplified explanation, right? But that's the concept. So now you can start to identify best practices. You can create a standard operating procedure as you see in this situation, right? Which can eliminate that variation and get everybody following it within alignment. And now all of a sudden you can also build measurement systems to measure those things. This is just a really this is an example of a fake Power BI dashboard showing kind of the details around widget production cycle time, right? But a couple interesting things that you'll see here is that, oh, hey, we see that component manufacturing and widget assembly, those are the 2 steps in the process that take the most amount of time. We can even take that data and overlay it on top of the process map. So we can see like, oh, component manufacturing on average takes 3 hours, 9 minutes, 11 seconds. And then widget assembly takes 2 hours, 29 minutes, 21 seconds, right? So now we know if we're looking at like the Pareto chart, or where can we focus to have the biggest impact if we're trying to shrink production time, we can focus in these 2 areas because that's where the most meat is on the bone. That's where there's the most opportunity for improvement. Now, all of a sudden, through going through those exercises, we have advanced from this lower level between level 1 and 2 to being firmly in the middle of level 4 in a process maturity scale on our process maturity scale with the widget production process. We're now ready for training on these new processes, and we've built a really strong foundation so that we understand how we can start to evolve into things like automation, right? You cannot automate a process if you don't have a standardized way of doing it, or especially if you don't even know how it's done in the first place, which is why taking steps like this is necessary to build those foundational elements to drive towards more advanced use cases. So that's kind of all for today's video. We have a lot of videos about our framework and how you use them inside of the organization, so please check those out if you like this. But I wanted to make this video to really just emphasize what it looks like and why it's important if you want to do more advanced things like automate processes, to really go through these initial steps of the maturity scale so that you're building a strong foundation on which to apply some of those more advanced use cases. So appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.